When I see the echo, I'm seeing the little dots move on your thing there. So let's test it out. Echo, echo, echo's gone away. All right. Okay. So we're at 7 o'clock. We have a quorum. Thanks everyone for joining. This is our meeting for business and finance. It is a special day in the Wachusett district because this was the first day of hybrid learning. We'll call the meeting to order, but Dan, I don't know, and I don't know if Daryl's on the line here. I haven't checked to see who's here. I don't see him here.
Daryl is not on the meeting.
Okay. Dan, do you have a kind of a 30-second, 30,000-foot view of how the day has gone?
Sure thing, Mike. Good evening, everyone. For the most part, the day went well. I'll speak to transportation. I know that I think Daryl sent a note out very late this afternoon. Transportation went well. There were a couple of situations where there were some stops and there were students who hadn't signed up, but it wasn't an issue. The buses rolled at the high school early on. 48 of them were there. They weren't filled, obviously, and something we'll have to talk to the bus company about to see if we can tweak some routes and get a few more students on the buses without compromising the integrity of the routes, and at the same time maybe reduce a bus. But anyways, the vans rolled up at the high school. The vans are across the district, and they have been rolling. We made some changes last week, but again, those changes with the sped transportation went well. If I may, no news is good news. Margaret's here. She's going to talk about food service, school lunch. We spoke briefly this afternoon. I'm not going to steal her thunder, but there was a small number of lunches that were given out, and I'll leave it at that. Again, I don't want to steal Margaret's thunder. Across the district, Margaret has some staffing vacancies, but it's all good. That is a 35,000-foot overview. How's that, if I may?
Appreciate it. Thanks, Dan. I know that transportation and school lunch are both on the agenda tonight, so we'll hold those topics for that. So the first item on the agenda is fiscal year 20 excess and deficiency certification. Dan, do you want to share an update on that?
Sure thing. So this was shared with the larger committee a couple of weeks ago. We did receive our notification from DOR. It was dated December 31st, and this year's figure is $1,408,047. As I had noted for Daryl, and he in his packet a week or so ago, we picked up approximately $195,000 from the previous year, a roughly 16% increase. And the reason for that, Mike, and again, if you go to attachment A, the one big difference between the FY20 certification and the 19 certification is that there weren't any hits. Typically, you would see if there were any accounts that were overdrawn, that would reduce our certified number, and that wasn't the case. And the reason why that wasn't the case is because in the close of FY20, we were able to make adjustments between a couple of revolving accounts in the general fund, and in doing so, basically negate the potential for any hits. There is one, and again, we'll get into it with a little bit with Margaret in food service, school lunch, and I did have a pretty lengthy conversation with my DOR rep. What I could do, Mike, at our next meeting, if you like, I can walk you through the balance sheet. I can walk you through, in particular, the various fund codes that they look at. And for school lunch, there are two buildings which really carry the weight of the district. Obviously, the high school and Mountview Middle School. The other buildings do run deficits. Last year is probably not a good barometer to analyze that, only because we were out from the middle of March to the middle of June. But they did ask me, you need to look at this, and they said, well, we did talk briefly about this last year, so I will be looking at it. Margaret and I had a brief conversation in terms of labor cost and expenditures and so on and so forth, to see what we can do to adjust that. But school lunch, that is the one account where a building can be in deficit, and it is not a hit to the process. What they look at, what DOI looks at for school lunch, is what is the bottom line? Is the bottom line in school lunch to the good? And if it is, then they're good. Whereas in other accounts, athletics has various sub accounts, and again, they look at each and every one of those sub accounts. And again, if there was a shortfall anywhere, that shortfall is addressed through the process. So we have 1.4 million in this at our disposal, for through the end of June 30 of 2021. In which case, then we will need to recertify that value. And this 1.4 million, excuse me, could be, and again, when we get into discussions of the 22 budget, a sum of money, perhaps, keyword perhaps, could be used to offset the revenues in the 22 budget. But again, that's kind of a little bit down the road. They DOR do recommend that if it's possible that 5% of the current year's operating budget be tucked away. And as you see in the cover memo here, that's approximately $5.1 million. So we got a ways to go if that were to happen. Again, that's based upon the FY21 budget. So that's just a quick overview, Mike. I'd be happy to respond to any questions.
Appreciate that. Any questions from the community on excess and deficiency? I'm seeing head shakes, so I think we're good to move on. So we'll move on to update on fiscal year 21 budget. And so it looks like this agenda has us set up for some focused discussions in a few different budget areas. And so I was just reading through your screen, but I think the first one you had there was grants. So Dan, why don't you go ahead and get us kicked off on the discussion?
So, Mike, if I may, and I apologize, I didn't catch up with you prior to,
Right.
Would it be okay, because Margaret Barton is here, if we could jump into the discussion on school lunch, so that
yeah, I have no problem as long as a committee, if any committee members object to just taking that out of order and taking school lunch first. I'm seeing nod. I think we're good to go. So why don't you go ahead, Dan?
Alrighty, so let me, since Friday, Mike, and since the packet's gone out, Margaret and I talked a little bit more about this evening's meeting, and I'm going to project here, let's keep my fingers crossed, that this all works, and Margaret is going to speak to this document here. So you've seen this, just if I may, you do see an Excel document in front of you, correct?
Yes.
All right. So what changed since the other day is this area here, and again, this is something that Margaret and I were talking about, and she's going to get into this tonight in her discussion. So I've asked Margaret to walk the group again through these numbers here, and also to give you the opportunity to ask her firsthand any poignant questions relative to the program and where she sees us for this year. So Margaret, I'm going to pass the baton on to you. The floor is yours, and if you want me to move this around at all, Margaret, just give me a holler. And I think you might be muted. Are you there? Margaret?
Rebecca, are you able to unmute somebody?
I just tried to unmute Margaret and I could not, but I am texting her right now.
Okay.
You know what? She may have to perhaps reboot.
Yeah, I should be able to unmute, but.
Well, why don't we go and take a different topic? And if she's
I'm sorry, Mike. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm sorry?
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I apologize. I was going to jump into the grants.
Okay, if she's going to reboot, then why don't we go ahead and take grants, and then we can, Rebecca or Margaret can kind of give us the high sign, and we'll just take them next.
All right, sounds good. Thank you. So the first order of business here, I'll go back to the agenda, are grants, and I printed out for you a report from the DESE that was dated January 8th of 2021. And it is a 3-year snapshot of our federal grants. And as you can see there are 2 very, very small nominal balances remaining in FY19 grants. And again, these are multi-year grants that do roll in the.
Excuse me again, I'm seeing the agenda.
Yep. All right.
Sure you're intending to show. Okay.
Let me get to the. There we go.
Great.
All right. So in FY19, there are a couple of nominal balances. There's 200 remaining in the 240 grant, and there's also $200 remaining in the Title I. Those dollars obviously will be expended, and I think I wrote in my report by the end of this month. The thing about this report that that I pulled from the DESE that they send districts every month is that this doesn't show the actual activity to date. This only shows what's been drawn down. So the actual expenditures are likely to be greater. So in terms of FY20, again, there are a couple of grants. The Title II, there's a balance there of almost $98,000, and these dollars again will be expended by the end of the year. For FY21, again, we've got some big dollars there. I'll just point out, for example, on the 240 grant, if I can, 240 grant, it shows we've got an available balance of 1.3 million. And again, the actuals is significantly less than that. We have, in essence, spent down in the 240 grant this year, of a 1.6 million or almost $1.7 million allocation. Our contracted services, which are in essence our tuition line in that grant, is pretty much spent down. So, and again, those dollars will be expended by the end of this month. One thing that we look to do, especially in bigger grants like the 240 grant, where 95% of it is related to tuitions, is that we look to hit those grants first or those accounts first before we hit the general fund. So for FY21, again, the 240 is one of the bigger figures there. What is not here is the school reopening grant, the almost 1.6 million, 1572 and change. And what I can tell you, though it's not here in front of you, that of that grant, last week we had approximately $116,000 remaining in that grant. And as you know from my previous discussions, we used a lot of that for PPE supplies and materials. We used a lot of that to address some of the challenges with our unemployment, to pay for some of Margaret's people, and some technology and supplies. But that grant is pretty much spent out. And if you recall from my previous discussions, that grant was to expire, if you will, on December 30th, 2020. It has been extended to December 31 of 2021. So in terms of the 21 grants, again, we will most likely spend these down by the end of the fiscal year. That is the game plan. And again, the big one there is the 240 grant, which is pretty much spent down. So, any questions?
Yeah, I have two quick questions, if that's okay, Mike.
Please.
Yeah, go for it.
So question one, I was about to throw them both on the table. Question one was about still spending in fiscal year 20 in Title II, what the plan is for that. And the second question is for the 1.6 million or so of the COVID grant, did we just spend that money, or have we actually gotten the reimbursements and we have the cash in our own accounts for that? Because I'm just concerned about, actually getting the money, right?
So I'll start with the second one first, Ken. So for the school reopening grant, the COVID grant, the 1572, almost 1.6, we did receive reimbursement. It came in, a portion of that came in about 2 weeks ago. I saw that on the vendor web. I don't have the figure committed, but I'll be happy to provide that as a follow-up to your question. I'll get that for you this week. And then in terms of the Title II grant, again, the intent is to spend that down by the end of 21. And I can certainly speak to Deputy Superintendent Burlow in terms of his plans for spending down that almost 98,000 and change. And again, the problem with this, even though the data it's dated January 8th, it doesn't show this is based upon drawdowns through the end of December. So there may have been some other activity that has occurred in the interim that is not reflected here.
But it's not a problem that we're charging against a fiscal year 20 in fiscal year 21.
No, it's not. No, these are multi-year grants that roll from one year to the other. No.
Just as a follow-up, Dan, can you speak a little bit to the mechanics of it? Because I think, Title II is a pretty good example, right? So if we look at Title II, in 2019 it's zero, that makes sense. In 2020, there's 97,000 remaining. In 2021, there's 87,000 remaining. This doesn't appear like it's a first in, first out kind of spending pattern. And so can you tell us a little bit about just a high-level overview of how these funds are used year over year?
So typically, these funds, the Title II funds, are used, I believe, for PD, and I'd have to go into the weeds to see exactly what they have been used for.
About the mechanics of it, right? I mean,
sure. Yep.
So we, for example, we have 9,700 that's spent against the 2021 grant of Title II, yet we have 97,000 remaining in the 2020 grant of Title II.
Right.
Why would it not be a first in, first out kind of scenario?
Mike, it should have been. What we should be doing is that we should have, or we should be tackling, we'll just stay with that, that almost 98,000, that should be spent down. And what we can do, and typically, Mike, in those cases where, there may be expenditures in the new fiscal year, like in 21, those could be adjusted back to 20. So point is well taken. I will speak to Deputy Burlow about some of those charges to ensure that those older grants are fully expended before we tackle the current year's grants. They should be. You're right.
Okay. I have one or two other questions on grants, but let me see if there are other members that have questions first. You're good. So my other question, Dan, is you mentioned 1.6 in the reopening grant, but as I recall, we've received other perhaps smaller grants. So if you could just refresh our memory, what was the total grant amount that the district has either received or anticipates receiving that's related to, COVID-related expenditures or reopening?
Sure. There were 3 grants. The first one, if you can see it here, was the ESSER grant for almost 177,000, and that has pretty much been spent out. The second grant, again, was a school reopening grant, 1,572 and change, round numbers, call it 1.6. And then there was a third grant, and the total of all 3 grants was approximately $1.9 million. Of that $1.9 million, again, as you can see, the ESSER grant, the 176,898, that is spent. The second grant, which is not listed here, was also spent out. So the third, as I said a moment ago, the 1,572, of that allocation, last week there was an unencumbered balance of approximately $116,000, 116,000, and again, that will be spent out certainly long before the new deadline of December 31st of 2021. So 1.9 was the value, Mike.
Thank you. So, and then you mentioned that out of the 1.9, there's about 116,000 that hasn't been spent. Does that mean that our COVID expenses, our unexpected COVID-related expenses to date, have been covered, and that we still have capacity for another 116,000?
So they haven't, Mike, because in the budget report that I'll get into in a little bit when we talk about the general fund, if you look at the undesignated in that report, you're going to see that there was a shortfall there. Excuse me, of again, we'll get to the report. It's either 209,000, 216,000. There's a shortfall there, and we're not done. And there are additional grants forthcoming. We talked about it today. We don't have an ETA on when those grants will be forthcoming, nor do we have an allocation as to when they will be forthcoming. But hopefully sooner than later. In the interim, Mike, we are charging to the general fund, in the undesignated appropriation, any and all costs that are COVID related. Again, there will be more ordering done. And again, we'll rather than charge it off to operations and maintenance, we're charging it off to that one line there, because as I believe I've stated in the past, we do have an application in with FEMA, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. And certainly we can certainly take those charges that are allocated to undesignated, and they potentially could be the second application that I'll put forward with FEMA.
So Dan, I'm sorry. Just so the $210,000 short fund, is it the intention that we would charge those to the $116,000 capacity that we have remaining in the grant?
No, they're not eligible costs, Mike. That's why they weren't charged to the grant.
So could you just speak briefly about what kinds of costs were you incurred that were not eligible for the grant?
Sure thing. An example is the HVAC work that we've done in all the buildings to get the buildings. That's a great example. We have expended a great deal of cash, since the summer to address all those issues, and we continue to address those issues. The problem that we encountered and the guidance that we received from DESE is, if you are incurring costs, or have incurred, or will incur costs relative to HVAC work, and those costs are the end result of perhaps long overdue maintenance, then it was advised not to charge those expenditures to the COVID to the school reopening grant, so. All those expenditures have been charged to the general fund, either in that one, in the undesignated, or perhaps they were charged to operations and maintenance. Because for the most part, one could argue, in speaking with Deputy Director, Deputy Superintendent Burlow, we both agreed that it was a gray area that we didn't want to go down. And because of that, we didn't charge any of that work, that extensive work, to the school reopening grant. It's not been charged, for example, in my application to FEMA, which I shared with you back in early September. That those charges weren't there either. Again, with the premise that it's necessary work, but necessary work not necessarily driven by COVID, but rather, perhaps long overdue that had to get addressed to get the buildings open and get people into the buildings.
Okay. Any other questions on either that topic or on grants in general before we move on?
Mike, just to let you know, Margaret is ready whenever you say.
Super. All right. Well, seeing no other questions, why don't we go ahead and move on to cafeteria?
All right. And again, just want to make sure people can see the Excel document up there on the screen.
Good evening, everyone.
Yeah. Margaret, can you see the document?
Yeah.
I can, thank you.
Okay. Yep. All right.
I'm on two screens because I don't know which computer is going to act up and which isn't, so please forgive me. What I did on this spreadsheet is there are two scenarios. If we were to, hopefully, fingers crossed, stay with the hybrid model that we launched today, it would be the numbers that you see at the top of this spreadsheet for the projection. And I broke this out to what our curbside meal delivery estimation would be, because we are continuing to feed children that are that choose to take remote meals, which would be 5 days worth of meals, or take the cohort meals, which would be 3 meals a week. That would be the estimated top line. The hybrid learning in school would be what we would have for revenues for the students, the estimated 2,300 that will be in school for hybrid. I believe that number has shifted a little bit since we did this. I think the cohort today, we had about 2,100 that were to be in school today. So that number, and from what I'm hearing from secretaries, it's still fluctuating. The revenue line, the line 7, July, December revenues, those are things that we would bring in. Typically, that would be our big money revenue right there. We would see our adult meal sales, our a la carte sales, our catering, anything that we would have coming in from our vending commissions would fall into that area. Obviously, because of this, we can't have a la carte sales at this time because of timing. Children, typically the high school is our biggest a la carte revenue generator, with students coming up and purchasing meals that they can take for sports time or later on in the day. We have a dedicated a la carte sales line. That's how much revenue we generate up there. Food costs, we look at that at about 38% of our revenues, and that is actually holding at this time. it will be an interesting year in that report just came out from Bessie and DOE that a large majority of the USDA foods that are allocated to school districts based on our reimbursement for prior years has been slashed. And it's a trickle down because they're having problems at the processor level, at the packaging level, at the distribution and the transportation levels that have majorly impacted school districts. So my allocation has basically been slashed to about a third of what I had expected to have come in this year. And that's beneficial food for us because it's basically no cost. It's $4 a case for food coming in to us that we can utilize. So that will be a big hit for us this year. And we're all being very vocal about that because none of the districts are happy with this sudden change. We had no idea that this was going to happen to us. The director wages, we have shifted from food service account over to the general fund. So that brings it out to a zero balance. The labor line to date is current. The projected line basically looks at the 95 remaining school days we have. We have 9 open positions. Once we had our layoff and we recalled staff, there were 9 staff members that could no longer join us, for whether it be that they took another position or with hybrid learning, they were unable to leave young children at home and return to work. So we are working to fill those positions and not at a rapid rate. Our numbers we're very, very low today. We'll get to that, but it will be increasing, we hope, and that will be the need for more bodies to come on board. There were immediate needs. We did hire 3 people, knowing that hybrid was going to start. So 3 new hires have come on board in the past week to get us going, and we'll see what we need basically week by week as things change. Paper costs, our paper costs are obviously going to be one of the highest supply line costs that we have this year with all the food packaging that's now required for us to do the meals to go. And the inflation of all those paper costs is really hitting everybody hard. In the beginning, distributors had plenty of product, and then there was none to be found. Our gloves have gone, for instance, about $1,000% markup rather. It's hopefully we've seen the highest that it will be, and it will start to level out as schools get back into session. The need for all these meals to go will decrease. Other costs would include things that we have on a regular basis. Our cooler rentals, for instance, things that we have a chemical program through all the schools that supplies everything we need. Basically, they're also our precursor to the Board of Health and do monthly inspections for us. Equipment repairs, unfortunately, those continue to happen. We're clearly not doing any purchasing at this time. We have gas in several of the schools to take care of as well. And that brings us down to our P&L line. If we can stay hybrid, fingers crossed, that's what I'm estimating would be the loss for this school year, coming in about $67,000. Can we scroll down, Dan? And the full remote, I hope we never have to return to it, but here it is. If we have to stay full remote, obviously, right now we have, or prior to today, I should say, we've had about 1,000 children coming to take advantage of the universal free lunch, which does extend through the remainder of the school year for everybody. So if those 1,000 children continue to pick up both the breakfast and lunch available, that would be our reimbursement projection for the school year. And basically, that would be the revenue that we would have. Minimal revenue would come in from any adult meals. Obviously, it would only be those that were in the building, particularly the SPED teachers or any admin. A la carte sales and catering would basically end. Food costs still remain the same. The The labor line on this would be based on what the current staffing levels are. Obviously, we would have no need to bring in additional staff if we don't have students in the buildings. Paper costs would rise because everything we're doing would be based on the to-go lunch as opposed to what we're doing in school. Cost lines would remain the same. And if we come down to that bottom P&L line, we're looking at about a $466,000 loss if we have to remain remote. I put a couple notes on the bottom of this today. When we look at, I didn't want to look at 19-20 revenues because it's pretty much a wash after March 12th. But if we look at 18-19 revenues where we came in at $2 million in revenues, I just wanted you to see a breakout of what we're losing. We do have a vending commission. I have a number of schools that have vending machines in place, and that was our yearly commission from 18-19. A la carte sales alone at the high school, and it does include adult meal sales, was just under 41,000. Combining all the other schools with their a la carte sales is the 29,000 that you see. Catering events that we have district-wide was the 32,000. And our reimbursement that year was the $615,000. And then our full paid student sales, it's $1 million. So that brings us to what our revenues should look like in a normal school year. What questions can I answer for you?
I have one question. Is there, can we use any of the COVID funds for the paper? Since this is something that was incurred based on COVID, and this is not a normal process, have we looked if we can offset some of those costs?
So if I, Ben, if I heard your question correctly, can we use the COVID funds to offset some of these costs? Did I hear, is that correct?
Specifically the paper, you know, something that has to be done because of COVID.
And the quick answer is we did use in the school reopening grant, there was a sum of money that was allocated for Margaret's program. I'm sorry, Margaret, I apologize, I cut you off.
That's okay. In that paper cost, there is a, in the formula, there is a $30,000 COVID paper supply credit that has come out of there already. And I believe there may be something else in the pipeline. I don't have enough details right now on what that would entail and the exact amount that would be allocated to that. But I am keeping obvious track of what we're spending and where for having to do the particular packaging that's required to do the program properly right now.
And what's not reflected here, Ben, but again, relative to COVID again, the DESE did make an adjustment for districts across the Commonwealth with an additional, for lack of a better term, reimbursement. Our figure was just under $11,000, and that adjustment was made at the end of December, this past December. Not a lot of money, but $11,000 or thereabouts.
And that is reflected in that revenue line.
Okay, thank you, Margaret. Thank you, Dan. I guess one other quick question, and I'm not sure how the bodies are spread out. School, we went from what, 3 or 4 lunch periods to everyone leaving at 11:30. How does that, you know, the expectation would be the staffing overall would go down, right? Is your current staffing level, even with the open positions, below what we would consider a standard staffing kind of force?
I heard some of that, Ben. I'm sorry. It's very, you're very quiet. But if I'm hearing you correctly, you're asking about current staffing levels as we're open. We have, my biggest deficit of staff right now is at the high school. I have 6 openings at the high school. And because the high school is not running a full meal program, they're doing a brown bag, grab and go out the door. Typically, I would have 15 staff members working 5 service lines during lunch. Right now, it's a handful of people getting distribution ready for 4 different exits at the doors. And I was up there today to watch all that, and they did a great job. Unfortunately, we did not have a lot of takers. But I think once things settle in and people get used to it, hopefully we'll see more response to that.
So Ben, your microphone did sound like you were quite a bit far away, but if I understood your question correctly, I think you were asking if there's an opportunity for a reallocation of staff based on the current hybrid layout.
Currently, I don't have staff to move around. As a matter of fact, my uniform is at the ready because I'm very short staffed. I have 1 school. 2 is the minimum number of employees that I have in a school. And I do have a number of schools that need to have 3 and are currently at 2 and are struggling already. We did have to move some people today for some coverage, but that's going to be a real tough call if we keep going forward and we keep having numbers grow in school eating.
Ken, I think you had a question.
I do. I think it's a question where the first half of it's for Dan and the second half of it's for Margaret. And first of all, thank you, Margaret, for all you've done since March, especially last year, making sure the kids who needed food were getting it in the beginning. So my question deals with kids in the building, right? So my first question, the first part of it's for Dan is, did we lose, like how many kids went remote that we weren't anticipating being remote? Because I can imagine once the reality of it struck, a certain number of students were like, yep, nope, I'm going to be remote, and that could be affecting these numbers. And the follow-up question for Margaret, I think, is sort of hinted at what she said is then, I assume that every lunch that a kid grabs is net positive revenue. I assume that's an assumption. Like my kid, for instance, if he goes to the high school, he's never bought lunch ever because of his food allergies. He would take one and bring it to his sister. It doesn't matter what it does when you leave the building, right? As long as he took it and somebody's eating it. So my guess, the first question for Dan is, are we anticipating less hybrid kids than we were anticipating a couple weeks ago? So did a bunch of people flee to remote once they actually were faced with going back? And what can we do if every meal indeed is profit? What can we do as a district to advertise that these meals are free? Because some parents might be thinking, well, I don't need a free meal. I don't qualify for free meals. I don't think that message amongst all the other noise has really been, not no one's fault on the call, but really been well communicated, right? So Dan, maybe you could start with the number question if you know.
So in terms of remote versus hybrid, Ken, we do have a set number now, and I'm just looking at transportation, for example, and I guess that number, I don't have the exact number. I mean, I'll get it for you. Could change where we had changes up until the other day relative to folks, having their son or daughter be remote or hybrid. To use my infamous term, it's a potentially fluid number. I will confirm that for you. And I think, as we continue down the hybrid path, knock on wood, if there is an outbreak in a building, and that building it does have to be closed, again, worst case scenario, that may impact who remains hybrid or who goes remote for the balance of the year.
So Dan, I'm sorry, just to I think the first part of Ken's question was, I mean, let's just keep it as simple as this. Were there fewer kids showing up in hybrid today than we would have expected 2 weeks ago?
To my knowledge, no.
All right, and then the second question? The second question is, I think, Ken, you were asking about, I think there's a question implicit in your second question, right? Which is it a fair assumption that free meals are net positive to the district?
Free meals are not 100% net positive. And it will never cover, if we had to stay this way, obviously it's never going to cover all our costs that we're incurring doing the program. Dan, if I could, I did run numbers today. We have 2,200 kids that are remote, that are hybrid, and a little over 1,900 that are now remote. And I did have a drop at the high school as we were trying to plan for today. Last week we were at 522, and we had 499 as of today that were in the cohort A. So I still think that there's going to be some shaking out of where people are going to land on this. Hopefully it's sooner than later, but we did prepare 350 meals ready to go, and we had 89 leave the building. I would love to hand everybody a lunch. I would love everybody to take a meal. It is unfortunate that I can't do that because, as you know, allergies, dietary, religious reasons, picky eaters. But, as I wrote to my managers this afternoon, I said, we've launched. Now we need to keep growing the business and encourage them to reach out to their principals to make sure that in their weekly updates that it is sent out to parents that all the meals are free this school year. No questions asked. Everybody's free. And that's important. We're going to get some photos out so parents can see what's going on in the kitchens. Some of this may be safety. I know there's still probably a lot of concern as far as what goes on. We haven't seen how things look in the schools, and we need to be able to reassure parents that we are above and beyond safe and making sure that everything, even as far as the kitchen goes, is safe for students to come in, which is important.
I have a question related to that, but I don't want to interrupt you.
Go right ahead, Malia.
Is it something that we could, I know this is going to sound crazy, but if it was on, I think I've talked to you about this before. If there's something on the food service page, then it's very easy to share amongst social media, which the district does not have a page, but many of us do, and parents do, and they share information. And that's honestly one of the best ways to get information out once it's on the district page. So if there is something on the food service page or the front page about food services specifically highlighting this, a graphic, a flyer, something that's really quick to share. And the second thing is that I know this is crazy, but if safety is one of the concerns, is there some way that we could, in conjunction with that, do some sort of a video to show them how the food is being prepared or what the kitchen is set up like, if that's their concern, to show them the safety mechanisms in place, just like we've done in the school buildings as a whole, because that may help address some of that.
That might be a good way. I know that there were a couple of videos done in schools showing walkthroughs. I don't know if they're going to be able to address that again to, update families with showing them what their kids look like in school and how it's going. I think that's really important for them they'll hear from their kids, maybe in a nanosecond how their day went. But I think if they're able to actually see what it was like, I think that helps.
I was thinking specifically in terms of food services, and if the high school's the main thing, can we put up a little 30-second video or something of them preparing the food and how it's going out so parents are aware, and then it can be shared, or what the kitchen looks like in the preparation area, and everyone has their PPE and whatever, so they know it's safe. It's not so much for, I don't know, it's a thought, because that seems to be the type of thing that gets people's attention and again, is easy to share and direct them to on a web page or share on social media, which is how they get a lot of their information.
Right. Exactly. I will, I did update the food service page prior to this week. So I will make sure too that we are up to date if there's been any changes with how things went after today. But it is relatively current as far as how lunch looks now.
So if I could just follow up, Mike, with a request for maybe our next meeting, that if Dan could provide us an update of, this estimation is based on handing out 2,300 lunches, right? And if it comes to the point that with the principals working hard and whatnot and making announcements that we're actually only distributing, a fraction of that, I think an analysis of how that affects food costs, I guess it's just a percentage, right? How that affects staffing would be something we should return to once it settles. Like it'll probably take a couple weeks to kind of just stabilize, right?
Right. Yeah, and I guess I was going to ask a follow-up to your question too, Ken. And again, and maybe we just don't know the answer yet, and I think that's part of what you're getting at. But I guess my question, and I think that Ken's question was more of an economics question than it was a social question, perhaps. But I think another way of asking it is, do we think that part of the solution is to advertise to people that free lunch is available from an economics perspective?
Is this for me?
Yes.
You can.
Well,
There-
that's not my question. I don't want to know if I can or not. I want to know if, if we help to fix the problem of if you think about cafeteria as an enterprise and knowing that we're getting reimbursed at the rates that we're getting reimbursed for free meals, is part of the solution of a declining enterprise to advertise that these free meals are available and that people ought to take advantage of that opportunity.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And it has been out there, and as I said, we will revisit it now that we are back and parents are going to be paying more attention to what's going on. This is much like, aside from the temperature outside, this is much like August. And in the beginning of the school year, it's new to everybody. We need to get some of the kinks out. And shortly thereafter, we find out that mom or dad or whoever is really tired of making school lunch. And, I think, if you want to have school lunch, get school lunch. We're hoping for that. That's the best we can do and get the word out through the principals as far as making sure our parents are aware that it is a universal program.
Okay. Any other questions on lunch? All right. So, Margaret, thank you for joining us. You're certainly welcome to stick around or go as you need. Dan, why don't we just stay on this agenda item, which is the revolving account for athletic, circuit breaker, and school choice.
Sure thing. So let's get back at it. Thanks, Margaret. We appreciate it. You can go about your home life now if you'd like. All right. So you have here. This is a budget report, and we spoke very briefly at the end of our last meeting about athletics, and you have in your packet. You've got this budget report, but also the projections that were done at the end of December as well from the athletic director, Jen Lynch. And I believe also too, we spoke very briefly again about the fee structure, especially in COVID and the fact that adjustments weren't made. In my executive summary, again, I talk about our fees and where we're at and some of the challenges. And I'll just stay with the high school, for example, that they have relative to expenditures. Each and every year, the MIAA will make adjustments in the cost for officials, regardless of what local budgets may or may not be like. There's the ongoing increased costs in transportation. And again, one of the changes pre-COVID that MIAA made was that for teams that enter playoffs, the price of success is that they're not necessarily playing local teams, but they may be traveling to Springfield or to Boston. Obviously, there are costs incurred there, and with COVID, and as I wrote here, instead of taking maybe 1 or 2 buses now, we may need to take 3 or 4 buses. Again, one of the end results of the FY20 closure was that we were able to make adjustments between the general fund and athletic revolving. So we built up the balance at the high school, and as I note here, the ending balance on June 30 was just under $108,000. Jen Lynch, our athletic director, is projecting revenues at approximately $222,000 and change, and the expenditures. And again, these are fluid numbers as teams are successful. Again, playoffs may require teams to play other teams outside of Central Mass. Just under 127,000 at 126,537. The ending balance, again, projecting, assuming that these figures hold, looking at $203,519, and again, that's a snapshot in this moment in time. This sheet here, speaks to the current fee structure that exists. I would suggest that maybe this is not the year, but at least begin to look at the fee structure. I'm more than happy to do an analysis for the committee and bring it back to them and show you where we're at vis-a-vis other districts. Perhaps not to make a change for 22, but perhaps to look at setting the stage or the foundation for making a change in FY23. And again, these are very preliminary numbers. A snapshot in time being the end of December in terms of where high school athletics may end up. And again, as we get into the season in terms of who pays, who doesn't pay, we'll obviously amend these figures accordingly. Be happy to answer any questions, Mike.
Ken, what you got?
Yeah, I have an observation and 2 quick questions. The observation is it seems like we don't have a problem at the moment, so I wouldn't be trying to solve it. The questions, I guess, one is, if you do that sort of analysis, I'd ask you to see if other schools have differential charges per sport. I will say, as someone who has paid hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars for a dirty track uniform, the profit y'all make off of track and running sports is high. The cost you have for sports like football and ice hockey is high. It seems imbalanced, and if you're going to raise fees, it seems like maybe there could be some attention paid to expenses. And the other question I guess I'd want to report on is, I never understood in the heat of the moment our logic for cutting middle school sports. I know it was immaterial because they didn't play anyway this year. But it seems like, again, I've spent $300 a year for the past 3 years on middle school sports, so my kid was in high school, and I just don't see how the math worked that we were saving any money cutting middle school sports. So before we have our next middle school sports, before we have our next budget conversation about that, I'd want to understand more the calculation of kind of like what you saw here of cost versus expense at the middle school level, because there was a ton of kids running around at Mount View on track teams, bringing a lot of revenue in with one coach. Doesn't seem like that we were losing money doing that. So those are my questions for the future.
Yep, and just as a point of clarity, Ken, I'm by no means advocating that we increase the fees. Also, I'm simply suggesting is that now is probably the time to look at this, to do it. I'd be happy to do the due diligence, have the conversation with Jen Lynch and Principal Biando, and certainly come back at a future meeting with some data, only to further massage that data, if you will. I don't think it's appropriate now that we'd be looking to make adjustments in 22, given the pandemic, but probably a year plus out. But why not start that process now? That's what I'm suggesting, and I'm happy to facilitate that.
Yeah, I think just Dan. I mean, I'll just to continue that line of thought. I mean, I don't want to speak for Ken, but perhaps where he was suggesting is that there are two sides of this analysis, right? One side is based on what other schools are charging, what do we think we can charge? And then the other side is, well, how much does it really cost us to run this program? And are we charging a level that's sufficient to be able to cover it? And, you know, as I look at this screen, at least for this year, it looks as though, and I understand this year is an extraordinary year, it seems extraordinarily so, right? We're covering it by 100%. We're doubling, or we have half the expense of the revenue that we're taking in. And so, you know, I think it's probably a bit late for this, but some might say, given the forecast for this year and given the extraordinary circumstance, perhaps it might have even made sense to go the other way and give people a break in the price. And assuming that we're too late for that, I guess as we move forward, there needs to be a balance in this analysis. And that balance is not only understanding what our peers are charging and therefore what we think we might be able to charge, but also what are we charging in relation to what it costs for us to run the program. That's at least my perspective. Any other questions around athletic revolving accounts?
I had a couple, just because we haven't seen this level of detail before, so I'm sorry. I have one is just a tiny technicality because it seemed inconsistent. There is a swimming was listed on the expenses, but not in the revenue unless I missed it, or the So I wanted to clarify that because I don't think we're swimming this year. Is that correct?
That's correct. So that would just be rolled into the fees.
Okay, it was just a consistency thing. So I'm trying to think. One, I've been asked this year by, and I did talk to Dan a little bit about this, by a couple of athletes who did play in the fall, why we are not reducing their fees, because other schools are, and because they have, you know, far fewer matches. I don't know about the playoff teams. I'm surprised they're traveling such distances, because my understanding was they were playing in pods that were local and had different arrangements than usual. So that's news to me, but obviously that's beyond us. But I remember.
So, Malay, I'm sorry, just very quickly, that when I was speaking about that, I was speaking in terms of general terms, and
okay.
So I apologize.
So not this year. Okay, so that's fine. But I've been asked by a couple of people why we are not reducing their fees this year, and I assume there must be a reason, because costs are going up because of, you know, extra official fees and extra equipment and safety precautions and transportation. But looking at this, if budget-wise, it's great. But if I were a student, I'd be really upset, because it seems like we're penalizing them for our not considering our fees over time. And if I were a student, I'd be very upset, or a parent trying to make ends meet while their jobs are, they're struggling because they've lost an income, or whatever the change might be this year. So I guess I share their frustration. And now that I see all of these numbers, in why we're not making even a small reduction. Because I assumed there wasn't a way we could until I saw these numbers and said, wow, this seems to be that we could, even a small amount, maybe not cutting in half, but it's not their fault that we haven't raised fees for so many years. And I don't see that creating a major budget concern. So I guess I just urge us to possibly revisit that or look carefully at that, because I can understand their perspective.
So these figures here again, Malaya, these figures are a snapshot in time.
Yeah.
Through December. Certainly, we will revisit these in the next couple of weeks, especially as the fall sports, at least right now, I believe that they're still targeted to begin in February. Football, for example, I've not heard to the contrary that that's not going to be happening. These numbers are likely to change. Again, one of the reasons why the balance is what it is, the beginning balance is what it is because we were able to make adjustments at the end of 20 to cover some shortfalls that did exist last year due to the fourth quarter, and basically nothing coming in.
Right. All right. I would just point that out because looking at this, I can completely see their point. And I think that's equally concerning when we have students leaving the district for a lot of reasons, that may just be something else to consider.
Thank you. So Dan, just based on what you've said, I just want to clarify a couple questions. So I assume it's the case that we did not charge for spring sports last year.
No, not to my knowledge. No, not to my knowledge.
I have to imagine we would have heard about it if we didn't refund, if we charged for spring sports and we didn't refund it to people. But based on what you just said, even if you just take that top line away, right, the 107,000 and just ignore it, what I'm seeing, it might be a snapshot, but it's a snapshot of a forecast. It's not a snapshot of an actual. There's actuals inherent in your forecast, but you're showing us revenues of 222,000 and estimated expenditures of 126. That's what I think people are reacting to. So it is what it is. What we're showing is that yes, there may be some additional costs here and there, but by and large, well, so let me ask the question a different way. What is our revenue over expenditures in an ordinary year?
So basically break even, I believe at the end of FY19, we did have a shortfall in transportation. At the end of 19, that was a hit to E&D. And if I remember correctly, we had a $70,000 shortfall in transportation. That was a hit. Right.
So what we're saying is that we're either charging at expenditure levels or perhaps a little below, and this year we're overwhelmingly above because of the situation that we find ourselves in. So I think that you could understand why people ask us if it weren't appropriate for us to adjust the cost in some way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. I guess I'm on a little different place. We've been talking about increasing the fees for now 2.5 years of this, and we've done. I think even we started the conversation before Dan even got here. We reviewed where Shrewsbury is. We reviewed, and the changes we're making aren't that large. Now this year, I think we shouldn't put anything on the table, but it's kind of, we continue to talk about how we should do. I don't think this is a fair year to talk about anything about the sports or how much it costs people because these are extenuating circumstances. But again, this is one of those topics that we've has been brought in front of this group for almost 3 years. And everything that I've seen doesn't say that inflation is going down, right? Things are just constantly getting more expensive. So I'm where I am is let's figure out money is a sensitive subject, probably going into next year, families where they are, but as in, should we increase this? I'm absolutely in favor of making some level of increase so that we can at least break even, because when the teams do well, and they have at Wachusett for many years, we're paying fees all the way into all the playoffs and all this, which is a great thing for the teams. It's a great thing for the community, but I think we should be at least on par with some of our neighbors. So.
And I have a history question, which maybe predates Dan. I may be misremembering this, but was there some point at which a portion of the AD's salary was taken out of athletics revolving and added into the general fund? And is that reflecting why we have a balance here if we're charging it to this grant?
Well, Ken, to your point, the AD is paid out of the general fund now at 100%. I to the history part of it, I don't know when that happened. I mean, since I've been here, she's been paid out of the operating budget. The operating budget essentially covers all the payroll cost, and that's it. Everything else is allocated to the revolving fund.
I'm pretty sure we were paying half of her salary out of the revolving since I've been on the committee, although it's been a long time. So
yeah, again, I don't know about that. Sorry, I can't help you there.
So Ken, my recollection is similar to that, and quite honestly, I don't remember us taking up the topic of athletic fees as it compares to other districts. I know that we've taken up, at least for the last 3 years, the question of facilities fees in relation to neighboring districts. But again, I think that there's 2 points to be made here, and one is what's happening this year. But the second is, as we look at what's the right level going forward, it's I think having a view towards at least a couple different factors, one being what's the going rate, so to speak, and the other is what's the appropriate cost of running the program, and what are the kinds of costs that we put into this account. All right. Any other questions on this topic? Or, I know we talked about athletics. Was there something on circuit breaker or school choice that we were going to go over?
I was really just going to clarify that I was not talking about going forward and cutting the fees. I was specifically talking about looking at that for this year.
Mm-hmm.
And I did some quick paper math, and even if you only cut it like $50 a person, that's $40,000 ish, $42,000, I think, which is a lot of money, but I'm just think of what our families going through right now. So it's not thousands and thousands of dollars. So just something to consider.
Move on to circuit breaker, Mike.
Yeah.
All right. So this is make it a little bit smaller. This is a report on circuit breaker, and as you know, all special education costs, including transportation now, hopefully with the SOA in FY22, may be reimbursed. Again, if the SOA follows as it had been intended, there'd be a rollout of 25% the first year, and so on and so forth. I want to jump down to another slide, though. So this is just a quick snapshot of our year-to-date revenues. I did inquire to the DESE about the recent payment. When they made the first disbursement back in October, the state budget had not been finalized, so they estimated the first payments. So our payment back in October was approximately $769,000 and change. We did receive a second payment, as you can see here, of $840,000, almost $841,000, just round figures. And what I was told is that we should expect in subsequent payments in the third and fourth quarter, that payments will be the 840,637. That bodes well, and that helps us, because in this slide here, this is kind of a snapshot again before I got that news. Just looking at all fund codes in terms of sped tuitions. In the general fund, we have 2.7 million. Again, our initial reporting of circuit breaker was almost 3.76 million. We brought forward just over $1 million from FY20, and again, we in the 240 grant, we're using 1.5. So on the revenue side, we're looking at just about 8.4 million. Through January 14th, again, as you all know, these numbers can certainly change, but hopefully not considerably. But our expenditures across all funding codes right now through last week are 6.6 million, and even that number has changed, given some purchase orders that I signed off on today. So again, this is a fluid number, subject to change. But through the 14th of January, we were looking at a balance of 1.7. And again, that number is going to be reduced, obviously, by the activity of today. And then again, we've got some additional revenues coming forward. As I had stated in previous meetings, as we proceed, as administration proceeds with the FY22 budget development, the goal is to bring forward an identified number of approximately $1 million, if not more, in the FY21 circuit breaker allocation. So that's that, and we'll use those dollars, the $1 million, as an offset to the 22 budget. So, and the way that I'm creating this year's budget document is, I think I heard the committee, and when you see the line item budget, I'm representing the cumulative cost. Let's just say it's $7 million, and then just for sake of discussion, and then allocate funds to FY21 circuit breaker carry forward, FY22 240 grant estimated number, and then obviously FY22 circuit breaker reimbursement, and that'll give us a net to the budget. But I think it was a little bit confusing last year, because that appropriation, we saw a decrease, but we didn't. But the total amount of dollars maybe in the budget was decreased, but that's because we had this other pool of dollars over here, and we will better represent that this year. So cut to the chase, we're looking at 1.7 plus with adjustments, and we're looking to bring forward a minimum of $1 million into FY22 to help us to offset the tuition costs for next year.
Thanks. And any questions on circuit breaker before we finish on school choice? Well, I'll go ahead and move the school choice.
I think Malaya had a question, or actually your hand's up. Oh, just a quick question on special ed tuitions. When do we normally pay those? Like, have we paid all of our special ed tuitions for the whole year, or do we still have? So like when I'm looking at this 6.6 million expenditures, do we have more expenditures coming due, or have we already paid all that we have to pay?
So first of all, we make payments to all our providers on a monthly basis through the warrant process. The 6.6, that is the known figure due to various providers across the board, wherever the programs might be it a collaborative program or a private day program or what have you. That's the number. And as I said a moment ago, there was activity today where I signed off on a couple POs. One was for 30,000, another was for about 15,000. So this estimated number, again, is fluid. I think as we talked about a couple years ago when I first started here, we also had a watch list, and there is nothing reported here. There is no watch list, but I felt it was important to make the committee aware that there might be a student who might be in the process of transitioning to an out-of-district program. That's not the case here, at least not yet. So we pay our bills on a monthly basis. The total obligation for all programs this year is 6.6, and our unofficial balance is 1.7, and that number is likely to will change as we progress through the spring.
All right, let's go ahead and move over to school choice.
So school choice, again, the 372, that's the value that we brought forward from last year. And the 155, 435, that's those are the year-to-date receipts. So we've got a balance of 527,481. And then in terms of the expenditures, we've paid, cash out the door, $9,000, and we've got encumbrances of approximately $125,000. So leaving a balance there of almost $394,000. And just in terms of the payments, again, school choice, we receive monthly payments. In December, the DESE will make their first adjustment of the year in terms of payments. So, I don't have that figure yet, but it is very likely that we will not be receiving the 31,000 and change moving forward. That's why the figures that are on the cherry sheet in terms of school choice receipts of school choice those are very fluid figures and don't necessarily represent the actual number of students who may be coming in and going out. So we received to date 155,000, but our monthly payments are likely to change in December for sure. We had built the 21 budget using school choice as an offset, and in particular, we had, as has been the case in previous years, where school choice is used as an offset for insurance and benefits. We have not made that adjustment yet this year. And again, the reason being is, as you'll see in a little bit, we're looking at a later date to make a transfer from salaries into benefits and insurance, so that we can hold on to our school choice for FY22, and even in these early stages of FY22 budget development, we're looking to hold on to that revenue for next year. So that's just a quick snapshot, and typically, and as I think I reported earlier too, we did use school choice this year as the account to make purchases for a lot of the PPE materials back in the summer and in the fall. And when we received the school reopening grant, the 1572 and change, those charges were reversed out of school choice and into that grant, because as I had reported, that grant was retroactive back to last March. Be happy to answer any questions relative to school choice.
Just a quick one, kind of following on that logic that you just indicated. It strikes me that if we could even move this $125,000 minus some change out of this into some other line, that school choice maybe should be the last thing we're touching if we're really looking to build up some sort of carry forward for next year. Is that in the cards, or?
It is, Ken. I'd have to go into the detail to see what the encumbrance is, the almost 125,000 there. But certainly, if these are charges that can be made to either an existing grant or to a future grant, as I spoke about earlier, then we'll do that. And again, the intent is to build up school choice. The district each year does fully expend, and that's fine. It's school choice money, and it's been the time that I've been here. It's been allocated primarily to insurance and benefits. But as you know, you have tremendous flexibility with school choice. Really, the only thing they really can't use it for is school construction. Excuse me. You can use it. If you had to make some adaptations to a chemistry lab at the high school, you could certainly use it for that. But so it has much more flexibility than say circuit breaker, which is restricted to only special ed costs. Not only, because certainly there are other areas within special education that could be charged off to circuit breaker if necessary.
Hopefully we do this though in a sustainable way, because I hate for us to build up a budget, like an expense level budget based on all these carry forwards, and then create a baseline that then we can't sustain into 23 because we're using lots of carry forwards to make up for 22, particularly in this line, because this is the revenue in is just going to keep going down because we're not taking more school choice students. So every year some of these kids graduate, it's going to get lower till it goes to 0 in like 5 years or so, right?
That's actually a good point to make. Thank you. Is that because we're not receiving new school choice students? I mean, our payments are based upon those who are here already. Yes, the revenue is diminishing and will continue to diminish unless the committee votes to excuse me to begin to receive new students in under school choice. Excuse me.
All right. Any other questions? College, you have a question on school choice?
So how do we account for the expenses? So like, where do we budget all the tuitions that we pay out for school choice? Does that just come out of the general fund then?
So we're not in the general fund. We do have a separate appropriation, other operating cost, and I'll speak to that when we get to the the general fund. And that appropriation, those are the assessments based upon school choice out in charter school. In essence, those students who are leaving the district for Leominster, wherever, other programs, and then obviously the charter assessment is for those students who are attending charter schools. It has been my experience that we have not budgeted school choice money in the past, aside from allocating the year's portion to offset the cost in the insurances, active employee and insurance, for example.
And I'm not advocating that we would, because we run a deficit every year on school choice. We've got like 370 coming in, 620 going out, and so so the utility with school choice, I mean, certainly is that it's one of those accounts that allows us to roll monies forward from year to year, whereas otherwise we might not be able to. And so no, because I mean, I get that. Otherwise, if we were to just put all that money against our school choice going out, then we wouldn't have any money available to roll over year to year. So I can understand the paying those out of district expenses from other pots of money. I was just curious where we were putting those from.
So so if you're referring to, Kyle, our out of district tuitions, again, we We make those payments out of several pools of money. Number one, obviously, is the general fund. Number two is the federal 240 grant, and then number three would be our circuit breaker account. Those are the primary funds that are used to pay for our out-of-district tuitions, and for that matter, any other related special education cost, if applicable.
And sorry, just real quick, are there any kinds of funds that we could move into the school choice account? So, like, beginning of the year, state cuts us a check for $370K, and that's all the money that we get from school choice in. Are there any other like funds that we could add to that account, or is like 370 the absolute ceiling that we could ever get? So, like, to get to Ken's point, if we wanted to absolutely maximize how much we would roll over, we would take the entire, or as much of the allocation that we got from the state and school choice and just try and roll that to next year.
So again, the payments for school choice are made on a monthly basis, number one. Number two, we can't commingle school choice with any other revolving fund. It's its own separate entity, if you will. But school choice, as I said, it gives a district, in general terms now, a great deal of flexibility in terms of how those dollars can be spent. They can be spent for instruction. You can pay for teachers. You can pay for technology. You can pay for supplies. Or yes, you can pay for benefits, such as health insurance and what have you. But you can only, again, this year, and we'll see the cherry sheet number in a few minutes. I think it's 300,000 and change that we're targeted to get. Again, that 300, whatever the number is on the cherry sheet, that's I don't trust that number. Again, because we make adjustments, we make reports to the DESE during the year, and with those reports, and again, there'll be an adjustment in December. That'll probably carry us through the balance of the year. But you can't commingle school choice with, say, circuit breaker or any other state reimbursement. You can't do that.
Yeah. So Carl, I think you understood the concept from the way you asked the question. The 372 was the school choice dollars that we carry forward into this year, and the 155 is what's been given to us so far. And so Ken's question is there any opportunity to reclass the 124 expenditures into something else so that we have those dollars to carry forward in the next year? But I guess my quick question, Dan, before we move on is, 155 is what we received so far, and you mentioned that those numbers are going to be adjusted. Do we know what the end of what the total amount that we expect to receive for school choice is to be for this year? Is it 155 or is it some number higher than that?
So so the 155 is year to date. So as you can see here, we've received 31,000 since July 1. I don't have the figure yet, but what I can do is that when we get that payment in December, or perhaps in January, but I'm pretty sure it's in December, that payment will most likely hold for the balance of the year, and I can just project out what we anticipate for receipts for the balance of the year.
Okay. Any other questions? Hearing none, why don't we go back up the one that we skipped over, which is transportation.
All right, so there weren't any attachments. I'll just speak to that here. So as I wrote in my executive summary, and I'll just go up there. Give me a second, just go up to my narrative. So we're, in terms of regional transportation, again, we're very close to wrapping things up with FY20 and the payment due our home school provider. and that will impact FY21. And then, as the committee knows, the governor did sign off on legislation, which in essence also softens the restrictions again on payment to vendors. So theoretically, we could have discussions with AA Transportation relative to some type of a payment for the days that the buses didn't run, and obviously moving forward on Wednesdays when the buses aren't running. But I'm not going down that road this evening in terms of what that might be. So you have here a quick snapshot in terms of transportation as of early January. Again, our home to school, where we're looking, our sped-in district, we're looking at almost 1.5 million, and that's a fluid number. And here's an example. Back in December, 1 week there were, I think, 36, 37 vehicles running. Then the following week, that number was reduced to about 30 or 31. And for a number of different reasons, changes were made. Today, to my knowledge, we have the full complement of vehicles running, about 36 between transit vans and minivans. But again, with COVID, and if there is any adjustments to be made in district, we have limitations in terms of the number of students that we can transport in a van. So that may require us to add another van. I mean, we did make an adjustment early in the year where we picked up several transit vans where they're a little bit bigger, and we could transport a few more students on them without while at the same time adhering to the DESE guidelines for transportation. In any event, estimating at almost 1.5, and again, I review that religiously on a weekly basis. Our out of district, again, these are fluid numbers where we're estimated at 1.1, and there may be some programs that aren't running. I do know that there were a couple programs that weren't running that are now running, and so those numbers will be factored into this 1.1 here. And again, one of the changes that we're seeing this year is Vanpool, who is our provider for pretty much 98% of our out-of-district runs. AA has two very, very small runs. In the past, they would what they would say, they would regionalize transportation. What does that mean? If a student was going to a program in Eastern Mass, they would transport maybe 3 or 4 students on a van, and 1 or 2 might be from our district, and the other 2 might be from another district, as a means of reducing the cost. That's not happening this year, obviously because of COVID. But again, right now that we're looking at 1.1, that's likely to change. Home to school. So the 1.7 here, that's based upon the buses rolling today. That's based upon 76 school days with no Wednesdays, and that's a firm number. What's again, what I said a moment ago is, if we do, keyword is if we do have discussions with AA about my term, a readiness payment, if you will, in essence, making a payment to them for the days the buses weren't running. Again, if then that figure is likely to change. And even if we don't, then there's still the question of, okay, what about the Wednesdays from, well, tomorrow, for example, moving forward to the end of the year, is there going to be compensation of some sort for AA transportation? Right now, the answer is no. The buses run Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. We're paying them for those days, and we'll leave it at that. But that's, again, if we have those discussions. So of a 7.2 appropriation, we're looking at a projected balance of 2.9. I would argue that it's not going to be 2.9. Number one, because of the sped cost, those numbers are likely to impact that balance. I'm not saying it's going to impact it by $1 million, but it will impact that balance. As I had stated before, and I think as we get into the 22 budget discussions, I think that we're going to need to, look at a sum of money that before the year is out would be transferred into transportation stabilization. I know that we, last year we moved over $1.50, and maybe this year it should be more than that. And again, that's a discussion, as we get into the 22 process and use it as a goal, if you will, as we go through 21 and prepare for 22. And then the question becomes, whatever the balance is, that is the town's money, and do we make an adjustment in their transportation assessment? And one thing too I need to point out is, as we get close to the end of the issue in 20, at least with AA, we did do a transfer of $150,000 into the transportation stabilization. I will need, and now that the state budget has been passed, I will need to make an adjustment in the assessment by the value that was transferred into that stabilization account, which is $150,000. So that is definitely on the to-it list very soon, to make that adjustment for that assessment. So I'd be happy to answer any questions relative to these costs, these estimated costs for the balance of 21.
Any questions on transportation? Ken, go ahead.
Just as soon as we can get clarity on the bus thing that I thought was done, I know you're anxious to refile that end of year report, because both last year's revised end of year report for next year and this year's end of year report for the following year, are going to greatly influence what we get, right? So.
Yes, right. And again, once there is closure to that, however, whichever direction, and if it does, if the decision does enable me to file, as I have stated, I will file the amendment, and just so the committee knows, typically we would have seen by now the first disbursement of regional transportation. In my discussions with Mr. Sullivan, Associate Commissioner for School Finance at DESE, back in December, he said, don't expect it in January, February, sometime in February at the earliest. And I think last year too, it was also delayed. Well, we didn't get it in January. It was in February that that payment, that first disbursement, came in.
I had a quick question. I just wanted to clarify. Did you say that the amount that's currently reflected here it assumes that we're not paying them for Wednesdays or any of the days we have not had school, correct?
That's correct. Yes, that's correct.
Just wanted to clarify.
Any other questions on transportation? Seeing none, let's go to, I think you just have a few other in this topic on fiscal 21, Dan, general fund, and then cherry sheet and FEMA.
Yep, let me just jump down to attachment G. Thanks for your patience. So this is a revenue report generated out of Munis, and again, I'm going to jump down to the next document. In here, I project out what I see as the adjusted revenues As I have reported in the past, Chapter 70 is almost 409,000 less than our approved budget. And again, this figure here, that's the value that was in the governor's original budget filed just about a year ago for the SOA. And when the SOA was nixed, so was that there. So that's that amount. The 135 in regional transportation. Again, this goes back to 2018, and the issue that when I came on board about the overpayment in 2018. As I believe I reported in the past, the DESE did not make the second adjustment last year, so they will make that adjustment this year. So that's what that figure there represents. But I also want to point out too that we're still looking at potentially 2.3 thereabouts. I have no indication from the DESE what reimbursement will be. Again, when we get that first payment in February, that will certainly be a very good barometer as to what we'll be seeing in June. And again, exclusive of any amendments that may or may not be filed with the end of the year report. So that first payment is going to be very, very instrumental in guiding me in my projections for the balance of the year. When the final state budget was passed, though, there was a pretty significant bump in charter reimbursement, and as you can see, we budgeted based upon the governor's budget's numbers from a year ago, almost 53,000, 52,823, and the final state number is the reimbursement is 214,000 and change. So I did factor that into the equation here. And again, we'll need to monitor those payments accordingly and make adjustments. But I did make that change there. But two other areas that I want to bring to your attention, or three. Medicaid. So I did have a conversation last week with our provider, and as you can see, we have 170,000 in the bank, and we're looking at, and that's through December of 2020, and we're looking at another 280,000 round numbers due in. The cost report, which is the final payment in June, and is a pretty significant payment, relatively speaking, was filed last Friday afternoon by our provider, UMass. They didn't have information readily available for me in terms of the value of the cost report. And again, going back a couple of years ago, that's what got the whole ball rolling in terms of the issues with Medicaid, because the cost report has to be vetted by Mass Health, and that is still several weeks out in terms of the process. UMass filed a cost report last Friday to Mass Health. They will review it, and any questions, certainly they'll be talking to UMass or even to us directly. I should know in the next week or two, probably by the end of the month, what the cost report is looking like. And that will be after the first pass through by Mass Health. So I'm hopeful that if we meet before the end of the month, I probably won't have that information. But again, what UMass shared with me is that probably, if not this week, but at the end of next week, I would have a preliminary number, and that will be a very good guide in terms of where we will land in terms of our Medicaid benchmarks if we hit the 450. Our interest, the past several years, as you know, we far exceeded our budgeted number for interest, and this year. Year to date, $6,200, down significantly. We did bump up the budget number for 21. In speaking with Treasurer Dunbar, I did reduce, at least on paper here, the estimated interest by 25,000, given the year-to-date activity. So that's an adjustment. And the other adjustment, again on paper here, is miscellaneous. And again, this figure, in terms of the revenue budget for the past several years, it was at 439 and change. The district hasn't hit that benchmark in a number of years, but it was carried forward. We did make an adjustment in the 21 budget. We basically cut it in half and then some to $200,000. And again, as you can see, I have scaled that back considerably by 125,000. And the reason for that, as you can see, we've got $6,000 in the bank this year. Typically, the venue for those dollars is reimbursements, cost shares from other towns to the district, where our provider is transporting their student to the Devereaux program, and then we would bill back to those cities and towns, based upon the route and the daily rate, X dollars, and we would be billing back to districts across the Commonwealth. That has basically come to a standstill this year, given hybrid and remote. So on paper, I have scaled that back by 125,000, and though I'm looking at 75,000, I will need to revisit that by the end of this month to see if even that 75,000 should be scaled back to perhaps 50 or even less than that. So at this moment in time, again, not knowing regional transportation an exact figure, where we're looking at a revenue shortfall of $532,236. Again, I would put an asterisk next to that. Again, not knowing the regional transportation disbursement for February. I'll come up for air.
Any questions on the revenue side? All right, Dan, if you can just give us a high level on the expenditures.
Sure. Be happy to. Again, in terms of the expenditures, there are two areas where there's money building up. Obviously, salaries and stipends, and transportation. And I think I've given you a pretty good snapshot as to what may or may not happen in transportation. And again, this is based upon the encumbrances. So we are going to need to make some adjustments in encumbrances. So we've talked about that. I think in terms of instructional support, that's another big area. But I did talk about in my executive summary. And something that is not here, but I did talk about in my executive summary. And today, just so that you know, I signed off on a PO for approximately $150,000 in more technology to get out to the buildings in terms of Chromebooks. So how are we going to pay for that? As I wrote in my executive summary, there's still a pretty decent balance in textbooks. I'm just looking at my notes here real quick. We have almost 617,000 unencumbered in textbooks, and Deputy Superintendent Burlow has been holding off on that. Again, we've made some purchases through the school reopening grant, but not to the value of 616,000. But my point being is that we will likely reallocate a portion of that. I don't have the exact number yet, from textbooks to technology to cover that. And again, this was, I ran this report on the 14th, so this doesn't reflect the 150,000 that I signed off on today. So point being is that instructional support, I'm not worried about that, though. Let's just say we have $1 million unencumbered there. There's still work to be done, and that will be reduced. Operations and maintenance, again, we, as you can see, we have a shortfall in the undesignated of 214,000. If there is nothing in that 214 that can be reallocated to the SRG grant, or to any of the new grants that are coming in, or when I submit my second application, if I do, to FEMA, then what I will do is just make an adjustment and back it out of undesignated, and that will reduce operations and maintenance, by that value. So that is pretty much spoken for. Again, special ed tuitions, we'll be making adjustments between the general fund and circuit breaker to spend down the general fund and to carry forward money in circuit breaker. Other operating costs, again, let me just make this a little bit bigger, I apologize. Other operating costs, again, these are our school choice out and charter assessments. When the final state budget was passed, unlike any of the previous drafts, be it the House and the Senate numbers, there was a significant increase in the final numbers. I want to say that the total value is like 1.7 million. I mean, we'll look at the cherry sheet in a second. So we will need to make adjustments in other operating costs based upon the final state budget numbers that were approved 2 weeks ago, end of December, early January. So we'll need to make some adjustments there. And I do have one other document. Let me just pull it up for a second.
So David, I'm sorry, before you move on to the other document, can we stay on this one for a second? So I guess I'm trying to roll up to the narrative here and maybe addressing, if we can for a moment, some of the larger numbers, right? So if we look at our expenditures net, our reduction in revenue, we have about $6 million. We have another $1.5 million that we're planning to carry forward to next year. Out of that $6 million, I mean, forgetting about the $1.5 million that we're carrying forward, we're showing a balance of $4 million in salary and stipend. How sustainable is that $4 million in salaries and stipends? And can you talk about that for a moment?
Sure. So that's the other document, Mike, that I'd like to pull up here if I can, real quick. So can you all see that?
Yep.
All right. So here's the number, the $4 million right here. These are estimated charges. Again, we've talked about assuming, depending upon which model we look at for school lunch, it has been my game plan that we would make an adjustment between school lunch and the general fund to offset that shortfall. And again, I use 500,000 to give Margaret a little bit of a cushion. This number here can certainly be adjusted accordingly. Day-to-day subs, right now we have an unencumbered balance of about 296,000, and I project that even in a hybrid mode that we will expend those dollars. I mean, again, I look at that on a weekly basis based upon payroll activity. The original allocation, that line this year, was 468,000. So we've spent some cash in that for sure. In terms of vacancies, there were a number of vacancies, and again, these are vacancies that through the end of December that we had. And just an example, these vacancies included a speech assistant at NAQUAG, a clinician at the Bright program at the high school. They included another resource nurse, There were a couple of technology integration specialists that are rolled into that number. So, and again, that number there, this is I'll highlight it. That is a fluid number, but through the end of December, these were the vacancies, and this was the value that I associated with those positions. So that number, may change. It may be less. There are still a number of bargaining units out there where contracts are not resolved, and I've allocated a sum of money. And when those negotiations are resolved, that number will be adjusted accordingly. We still have in our coaching line 261,000 that remains, and again, we haven't fully encumbered spring coaches, or for that matter, fall too. Again, football has been pushed back to February, and that's why they call it fall too. So that number will need to be encumbered, and that'll be a hit to the balance. Building subs. This is something new that Darrow has authorized the principals to look at as a means of supporting their challenges with getting day-to-day subs in. We're looking at approximately 20 individuals and paying them $1.50 a day. And I just rounded the figure up to about $230,000. And again, my note is that this is something new. In the past couple weeks, and principals are out there trying to get a person or persons. I believe the high school has brought on 3 building subs, to assist in the buildings in lieu of trying to get day-to-day subs in. So that's new. And that number may be tweaked. We may need to add more, or we may need to scale back because principals simply can't find a building sub. And then transfer to benefits. And again, as I had said earlier, we did build the 21 budget on the premise that we were going to use school choice money as an offset. We have not done that, and we're not using school lunch as an offset either. So, I will bring to this group a recommendation to support a transfer for the full committee at some point, probably in February. To transfer a sum of money. In this case here, I have 700,000 from salaries into benefits to address the benefit shortfall. And again, due in large part to the fact that we haven't touched any school choice at all for FY21. So, given these estimated charges, I'm looking at a balance here of approximately $1 million plus in our salary appropriation, subject to change.
So thank you. Actually, if you can go back to that for a second, Dan. I mean, I think that addresses part of my question, but it raised a couple of questions for me. So when we say $500,000 in various vacancies, are these vacancies that we're trying to backfill?
Some of these vacancies are the result of the pandemic. I'm just looking at my list. Some of these, a lot of these are in response to some additional challenges in special education.
I guess my question is, do we have open recs for $500,000 worth of salary right now?
I'm sorry, Mike, I didn't hear you.
Do we have open recs for $500,000 in salary right now?
These were postings that HR had, and these were the values that I associated with them. There are that.
So the answer is yes. These are
okay.
We have open recs right now.
The answer is yes. I also would like to state that that 500,000 does include a couple of placeholders for some special ed responses to special ed challenges as a result of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Let me stop for a moment and see if other committee members have questions or comments. Ken?
I guess I have a weeds comment and a big picture comment. The weeds comment is, I guess, with the building subs, we want to make sure that they don't collect enough days to become members of the bargaining unit. But the bigger picture question, I think, is going back to the roundtable of, I guess, a few weeks ago now, where I forget which town the fellow is from, but he did make, I think, an astute observation at the time that we didn't hire things that were in our budget, right, in terms of some of the counseling positions, for lack of a correct description. We cut positions that resulted in curricular changes. So at Mount View, for instance, we lost a foreign language, we lost strings due to reductions of positions, some of which, of course, then cost us money and benefits for unemployment insurance, right? Presumably. But now we're looking at $1 million surplus in this line, and I'm not blaming anyone here. I mean, the idea of we didn't know it was coming, right? Like, we wanted to be conservative. We had to be careful. We didn't know where the budgets were, and money's better than we thought. I just observed the fact that that I would like to say to that guy, yeah, it seems as though we will wind up with the money in the budget where we probably could have paid for some of those positions. And I think we should just be, I know there's a later issue on the agenda about planning for next year. I just think we want to be aware of the fact that, as we move forward, we've lost things and we have a balance, and we don't reassess all of it too much, that we lose track of the fact that we made some reductions, both of things we thought we needed and things we already had, to get to the level where we wound up with $1 million budget. Again, no blame, because we didn't know it was going to happen, right? And we had to be conservative, but so I know it's just my observation of that comment from that meeting.
Yeah, Ken, I mean, I think I was driving to the same point, and that is, it's not terribly surprising, given that our revenue, all things considered, was relatively flat. We made a number of cuts, and what we're showing is, well, at least in the operating, we have, I mean, aside from $1.5 million that we're trying to put aside in revolving accounts, we have another 6 minus, and I don't know if it's quite 3, maybe it's like 2.5 less than the 6, because the transfer to benefits is just covering a hole in another line that we saw a moment ago. So it's just shifting money from one line to another. But that we do have an appreciable sum, an appreciable balance, is not surprising, or shouldn't be surprising to anyone. Is that a fair statement, Ken?
It is. Again, we in essence operated for this first couple of months of the fiscal year on a 1/12 budget, if you will. Even though we weren't in 1/12, we operated that way very cautiously. Excuse me, not knowing where the state budget was going to land. And I mean, here we are. The state budget was just recently approved, and one curveball that I took away from that, as I said a moment ago, is that under the other operating cost, this budget report shows a shortfall of 344,000 and change. The final numbers, and we get to the cherry sheet, 1.7, and we had budgeted 1.1, almost 1.2. So that was a bit of a surprise. So we did move forward cautiously. And all hands were on deck, obviously, to address the issues in the buildings relative to the environment and to the HVAC work. Say it 10 times fast. To get people into the buildings. So yeah, I guess I'm not surprised that the number is what it is, but there are still things that have to get done to reduce that balance. I mean, one thing that I preach is that all of our coaches should be fully encumbered. That's 261,000. We can't encumber our day-to-day subs. That's almost 300,000. We can't. Again, there are several groups whose contracts haven't been resolved, so there is a sum of money there that's allocated to make adjustments when those contracts do get resolved.
Yeah. So I mean, I think the point here is that if you're looking at 6 million before, and even if you take all of these things, and again, I think the 700,000 is just plugging a hole. So if you reduce this by 6 million by 2.3 or even 2.5, you're left with a very sizable portion, a very sizable balance in this year's account so far. All right. Any
Mike,
other
can I ask
questions regarding? Yeah, go ahead, Millie.
Yeah, I had a couple, not somewhat related to what you just said. I was going to ask similar questions, but one of the things I did want to clarify is that I noticed under the instructional support, there's some pretty large balances also. Did you cover where those are going? I know the textbooks you talked about, some of it's getting moved to technology, but all the contracted services, do we have a plan for those funds, or are they just remaining unused and being part of that carryover?
No, so as I had written in my, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, yep.
There's an echo there. Echo? All right. As I had written in my executive summary, there are really three areas in instructional support that are driving that balance. Number one is both SPED contracted services. There's an unencumbered balance of 436, and then in regular ed contracted services, it's just under 100,000, 95 and change. And again, what we do is that as a need arises, we put all the money in one line and then we transfer the money to the respective buildings. So that's one. Number two, general supplies. Again, there's a balance in there of about 175,000 and change. And then the third area, as I said a moment ago, is in textbooks, and we do have a game plan in terms of addressing that balance there. And Deputy Superintendent Burlow, again, operated with caution, not knowing the state budget, again, knowing that he had some other financial resources at his disposal, like the CRV, the school reopening grant, to address some of those curriculum needs. Not all, but some of them. For the startup of school.
Yeah, I guess my biggest concern is with the contracted services, because those are fairly large amounts, and we have positions, as been noted in this conversation, that we opted not to hire. For example, the counselors, and I know Daryl even mentioned those at our last meeting, that you all were trying to think creatively about how to still find some support for those needs. And I look at this and I say, well, at the very least, why aren't we hiring people under contracted services to help with those needs? Because we have a sizable amount of money. So I guess my concern is that as we've walked through this and as I read this, there are some places that you've explained, you're saving for next year essentially. But at what point do we balance that? Because we have some needs this year that have been substantial and have not been met. And I guess I question why we haven't gone back to see if we can reallocate some of these funds to fill some of those needs, even if it's the middle of the year, because we have them, and in some way thinking creatively to meet the needs that we have. I listened to the budget roundtable. There was a lot of discussion there. That's a whole nother topic, but that was one of the things that I heard people asking is, where has our money gone? And when you look at this, we have more funds than we have funds that we're saving for next year. And there is a value to saving some of it to carry over. As we know, our budget is going to be highly unpredictable, and the enrollment's going to impact it, and all kinds of things we'll get to. But it seems to me like there are areas where we are perhaps over saving. And I'm concerned that we are not meeting needs that we had in this year's budget that we could now be meeting in some way. Even if it, I don't know. As I said, the counselors come to mind because Daryl mentioned those at our last meeting, and they've been a topic of discussion all year. So why aren't we using some of those funds for that purposes such as that, or thinking about how to do that? So that's my concern. My second is that you mentioned some of these other positions that have been added due to, whatever needs we have. Is there a list of those? We had a list of the positions that we cut, but is there a list of positions added that were not anticipated that are have been brought on this year to meet specific needs? Is that something that you could provide in our budget process so that we could have that update?
I have a listing, given my discussions with Mr. Carlson, that I have here.
It's more of a curiosity in terms of what of those needs are we actually filling now versus, that we've not talked about. And then my third question is, I will get to it as we move forward, but I heard at the budget roundtable, some people were very confused because they saw what was online in our March budget last year, and it doesn't match our actual spending in the revised budget. And I'm wondering if you have someone in that meeting did request an updated version of it with our actual figures this year. And I don't know if there's been work done on that, and if that's something we could see where all of this would be in one place.
So the gentleman that you're referring to is a gentleman from Princeton, and you know, I am more than happy to post. I'm number one. I'm more than happy to share with him, you know, my meeting packets. I think that he'd find that helpful, and secondly, I'm more than happy to post online. I don't think that my packets are on the website. I'm happy to, under business and finance, I can, you know, go back to July and just post the packets for every meeting.
Some of them are, but they're
the
embedded in
packets
the
are,
superintendent's report, so they're very hard to find. But that may be helpful. I'm just trying to think of ways to make this, I guess, transparent, because even in this format, I mean, we walk through it at every meeting, but if people go online, they see March in the budget book that's online. They don't see that updated with our revised budget. So it would be helpful.
What they see online, Malay, they see the budget book. You know, I don't post any budget reports. I'm more than happy to do it. More than happy to do it. Post my activity. You know, my reports. They are in Darrow's report. You know, along with, you know, of many other reports. But I'm happy to have a separate section. You know, I'll speak to IT tomorrow. We'll get it up there. Separate section on, you know, business and finance subcommittee meetings. We'll just, you know, go through the year, boom, 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 put them up there.
Yeah, I guess, you know, because I was on the budget roundtable meeting also, and you know, the question, I think that the case was being made that, hey, look, you know, the budget was funded by the towns fully. You know, by and large, you know, the revenue that was expected to come in from the state came in, not completely, but you know, within $500,000. You've made cuts so dramatically. We're not in school for the first half of the year. Where's the money? Right? I mean, that was basically what they were saying. And the answer, I think, that came across was, well, we have expenses that were greater than what we anticipated related to COVID. But you know, really the answer is the money's there, right? I mean, we're projecting, what you're showing us today is not only are we planning to carry forward the same level of funds that we carried forward from last year into this year, but as of today, there is a sizable balance that perhaps could be used to deal with a projected shortfall in funding that we have for next year as a result of reduction in tuition, for example. And I think that might be part of the transparency that's being spoken about.
And just so the committee knows, I did have a follow-up meeting with Ron San Angelo. He's a town manager out in Rutland. He's been on the job, you know, a couple of months, I think it is. We met a week ago Monday. We met for probably a good hour and a half, and I walked him through a lot of information.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other questions regarding fiscal year 21? I know that there was something about cherry sheet and FEMA. I feel like that we've discussed that at least, you know, throughout the course of the discussion. So if there's no other questions on 21, I'd be inclined to move ahead to fiscal year 22 if nobody has an objection.
Just a comment, Mike, on FEMA. And the comment is that this you know, I did receive an inquiry for more information last Friday afternoon. Again, MEMR is the conduit for FEMA. My rep at MEMR had 3 questions for me. I fired off the answers, you know, 5 o'clock Friday afternoon, back to FEMA. So our application of $129,000 and change is, you know, still under review, and I'm hopeful that by the end of the month, you know, a week or so away, that a week away. That we'll have some resolve on the application. Either we're getting something or nothing, or maybe something in between. So that process continues.
And then just remind us, what's the value of funds that we are thinking that we might be eligible for FEMA?
Approximately 96,000 and change, and that was the value back in when we submitted 75 cents on the dollar. And I'm not aware of any changes to that, but that's what we operated under at that time.
Okay. Great, thank you. All right, so I want to go ahead and move forward to fiscal year 22.
So we are very much in the process of the 22 budget development. Daryl and Deputy Burlow met with principals back in December relative to their goals, and as part of that, talking about the FY22 budget. We, again, working on a line item budget this year. One thing that's a little bit different is that I think it's going to be a little bit more extensive for people. There'll be more data there for people to look at. Obviously, losing 400 plus students per our October 1 count, we're hoping that we're held harmless in terms of that there, and hopefully we will not be negatively impacted by our Chapter 70 for FY22. There's an assumption that the SOA will move forward again in 22, but nothing definitive yet relative to that. And again, for the 21 budget, the SOA, again, we had 408,000 built into the original Chapter 70, but also too, there was going to be additional funds made available in circuit breaker through transportation, through a phase-in, which got postponed in 21. We're making some assumptions as we go forward. Obviously we have contractual obligations. There are a couple of contracts that are up next year. The teachers, being one. The nurses, I believe, is another one that comes to mind. That will impact the 22 budget. And then there are still a couple of contracts, as I stated a moment ago, that are still in discussion, but I think that there is light at the end of the tunnel with those contracts. Health insurance is a huge number, a huge unknown. There's a very, very, very tentative number out there, but we won't have a definitive number for a couple of weeks. And between our salaries and our benefits, that's the better part of 83-84% of the budget. So that's kind of a quick overview as to where we're at this point in time.
Any questions on fiscal 22, Ken?
It's probably a question for you, Mike, more than Dan. But I guess in terms of process at management tomorrow, I feel like we're way behind intellectually. Nothing that Dan's done, because numbers are fluid and we don't know what revenue is going to be. But just in terms of having conversations about the strategic plan and our priorities and how those impact budget. It's disappointing, I guess I'd say, that it's not on the budget in the agenda meeting for the full committee at any time in January. I hope it's maybe something that, since it's not on the agenda for management, that you might bring up tomorrow, under this report, if it doesn't come up in another place. And I'm sorry, I went totally off the question for there, but I seem like you're going to respond, so I'll be quiet.
Yeah, I was going to respond. So I guess I have two thoughts. One is, I wanted to give people in the committee an opportunity to ask questions before I ask mine. But one of my questions that, Dan, you don't have to answer immediately, but I do want to ask tonight is, what's our next stop on this journey? Because as Ken points out, I do think that we feel like we're behind in this process, and I don't think that there's any advantage to be gained, or I mean, said differently, this feels like the kind of year where we want to make sure we're ahead, not behind, because of some of the challenges that we're certain to face. But to answer Ken, your question directly, I may not be able to attend the meeting at management, but if I'm not, I'm hope that you'll bring light to the issue that we do appear to be behind in this process, and we just need to have awareness around it and how this process aligns with our priorities. In fact, it's on our agenda as budget priorities, but it doesn't appear, or doesn't feel like we're having, or there has been to date, any conversation around budget priorities, either with us or with the full school committee. I'm not sure if that fully answers your question, Ken, but I think you had a second one.
Yeah, it was more of an observation than a question anyway. But
Yeah.
the very narrow question, I'm sorry if this is going backwards, but when you mentioned health insurance, it came to me. Did we ever get any sort of rebate from Blue Cross from last year? I know some employers and some individuals did, outside of, because of the lack of use of healthcare last year.
We did. We made a payment. Forgive me. I want to say it was back in October. Don't hold me to the exact date, but we did. Yes, staff. Yep.
I remember that, actually. I remember signing it. But did we ever get a reimbursement as a district, a refund, a rebate of any portion of our portion?
No, it was passed down to staff.
It was just staff. Okay. I was curious. I did have a process question as well, but I guess I'll watch management tomorrow to find out. But I was going to ask about process and where we are in the process, because I know that consistently the past couple of years, and in November or in December, when you brought us the process document, it included 2 or 3 meetings with this committee and the school committee to discuss priorities, and not just, this is what we're doing, but this is where we are. And I know that's beyond you. It's a bigger discussion, but I guess I'm looking at the calendar and we're running out of time. And I have asked, I'll tell you, I asked Megan this about a month ago, 3 weeks ago, maybe. And she said, well, probably not until February because there's too much going on. And that might be, but that concerns me given the discussions the past few years that we have not had. I've heard references to our strategic plan, but I hear that and it ends this year. So if we don't have a revised strategic plan, which we don't because, COVID and everything else, I'm not even clear on what objectives we're going to be able to tie this back to looking forward, because our strategic plan ends in June. And some of the goals in it are unmet and some are not, but we haven't had that discussion yet either. So I'm very concerned about the process and the discussions we've had the past couple of years about the need to not just hear what administration thinks we should have as our priorities, which I saw some of in the budget roundtable, but allowing the school committee to have some input and discussion of those priorities given where we are and where we need to be. And I don't see room for those discussions in our plan. So I'm curious, I hope there is something we don't know about yet. And I know that's beyond Dan. But I guess I'm wondering if there's anything that you can share that we're not familiar with, if there is a plan to have a meeting or a couple of meetings going forward where we talk about actual priorities, not just numbers and what would be carried over or not, but actual, what positions do we keep? What curricular changes are we making? What things are we emphasizing as a school committee, and not just rubber stamping what you all bring to us the week before it's due? So that's my concern with the process. And I know that is not really it's probably more of a Daryl question than a Dan question, but I don't know if you have more information that you're able to share with us about that.
So what I can share with you, again, I can't get into the whole process. That involves a couple other people besides myself, for sure. I do want to share with you that I am very much involved in developing the document now, and I fully understand that there may be tweaks, but I've I'm projecting out salaries as I know them, subject to change. I'm projecting out expenditures as I know them, health insurance, tuitions, transportations, et cetera, as I know them, and subject to change. But they're, I'm very much into it, if that makes any sense.
It does. It doesn't really address the concern, but as I said, I think it's involving other people. And I hope perhaps if management's meeting tomorrow, that will come up, and perhaps at our meeting Monday, we may be able to get some sort of update on that, because it is, I thought we'd have a budget retreat type meeting scheduled by now for January, which we talked about in November. And that is, for lack of a better term, and that doesn't exist. And I don't see where that something like that would fit. And I see us having the same discussion we've had the past several years in the full school committee, where we go in these cycles and we say, gee, I wish we had a chance to talk about these things in more detail before we had to vote on it. And I don't see where there is room for that right now. So I guess my request is that perhaps that be considered, because we've talked about it every year I've been on the committee, and it doesn't look like it's happening.
So, Dan, I guess what I'd ask, I mean, I know that we looked at maybe a couple of months ago, kind of an outline of a calendar of different things that would happen, and I suspect that we've missed several stops along the way. I don't want to wait for another meeting to review that, because I fully anticipate that when we meet again, we're going to be in the middle of it. And so if I could ask that you send out to this committee, and then it probably needs to be a piece of information that's sent to the full committee, what is the revised calendar and plan of action for forming our budget? You know, when can we expect key pieces of information, and perhaps even more importantly, when can we expect to provide key inputs into this process? Is that a reasonable request, Dan?
Yeah, I'm just taking notes here, Mike.
Okay. No, I appreciate that. I just want to make sure I'm not asking for something that's not reasonable.
Got it.
Okay. Any other discussion on fiscal year 22 budget?
So can I think we're done with the handouts. Do you mind if I stop sharing my screen and see all your faces?
No, not at all.
Okay, thank
If
you.
we're done with budget priorities, the next item on the agenda is approval of minutes for November 30th. Entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion on the meeting minutes as written? If not, we'll go to a vote. Rebecca, do you mind calling?
I don't. Dennis,
I'll abstain.
Ottmeyer,
Yes.
Mills,
Oh, yes.
Gustafson. They
All right.
pass.
Perfect, thank you. Next item is I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes for December 21st.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion on the minutes? Hearing none, we'll go to a vote.
Dennis,
Dennis, yes?
Mills,
Mills, yes.
Ottmeyer,
Otmar, yes.
Gustafson.
And it sounds like those pass as well. Thank you.
Yes, it does. I'm sorry.
Perfect. Okay, so next item is next meeting. So we will intend to have a meeting in the beginning of February. So in between our next two school committee meetings, and hopefully we'll have greater emphasis on planning for fiscal year 22.
Mike, can I just ask, would you plan to schedule that February 1st, which is between the January
What's the
25th?
next school committee meeting?
We have one on January 25th and then one on February 8th.
So I guess, Dan, are we going to be in a position where we can discuss something substantive and meaningful for fiscal year 22 budget?
On February 1st?
Yep.
Let me circle back with Daryl, and I would be prepared to have a document, but I need to talk to the superintendent.
So
I
let's
can
do
get
this.
back to
Why
my.
don't we schedule the meeting? Why don't we schedule the meeting? And if for some reason you are not ready, we can always cancel and reschedule, but I would be disappointed if we had to do that.
Do we have options for other days that week besides that Monday?
My preference would be to be on Monday, but you know, if it's really a matter of days at that point, Dan, then we can have a one-off conversation and see if we need to reschedule it.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. All right. With that, if there's nothing else, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those, let's see. Can't do all those in favor, can we? We have to call roll. Yep.
Dennis,
Dennis, yes.
Mills,
Oh, yes.
Otmar,
Otmar, yes.
Gustafson.
Thanks,
I
Dan
think
and Rebecca.
Yes. So thank you, everyone. Appreciate the time tonight, and we'll pick it up hopefully on February 1st. Have a good night.
Good night. Thank you. Good night.
Thanks, man.